Hi, my name is Loui Manggana, a BSHM1 student of Visayas State University main campus, Baybay City, Leyte. And for today's video, I will be discussing about the history of travel and tourism in different eras, as well as the history of travel and tourism in the Philippines. But before that, let me tell you something about why we need to know or to understand the history of travel and tourism. So, why we need to know the history of travel and tourism? Well, simply because knowing and understanding the history of travel and tourism give us a learning of how past travel and tourism being operated and how they have changed. It enables us to comprehend the past, which allows us to comprehend the present. We must go to history for answers if we want to understand how and why travel and tourism is the way it is today. History of travel and tourism in different eras. Early tourism. Romans and Greeks were well-known traders in the past, and as their empire grew, travel became necessary for them. The improvements of first-class inns, roads, and communication aided by Roman travelers. The first notable thing that happened during this era is the Appian Way. Appian Way was Europe's first highway and remains one of the best attractions in Rome. It is the oldest road that still exists, and it was ancient Rome's most important military and economic artery, and it is largely intact until today. Second important thing that happened in this era was the relays of horses. The Roman also employed relays of horses, and every 6 miles, a stable could be found where travelers could change horses. Because of this, distances from more than 100 miles could be reached in one day. Pilgrimage. During early tourism, religious travel were in the form of pilgrimages to worship. Pilgrimage, where the impulse to travel to holy sites appears to be a nearly universal component of human spirituality. Santiago de Compostela Cathedral is a proud final destination of every pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago. It is reputed as burial site of Saint James the Apostle and a UNESCO World Heritage. Medieval period, also known as the fall of Roman Empire. Because numerous robbers preyed on individuals who sought to travel, no one traveled for pleasure during this period. This was the time when only pilgrims and crusaders traveled. Renaissance period. During this period, few renowned universities were developed. The British introduced travel for education, which became popular in the 16th century. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, young aristocrat men who were aiming for position in court were encouraged to travel within the continent, and other men with lower skill gradually adopted the practice. The practice was called Grand Tour. Grand Tour is a culminating education experience for the elite of the Enlightenment. The tour includes visiting different cultural centers on the continent for 3 years, and in the later part of 18th century, Grand Tour was institutionalized for the upper class. People traveled for health and wellness throughout this period aside from educational purposes. Sick individuals came in to seek relief from their ailments in medical bath, and one example of a medical bath was the Great Bath in England. For generations, the well-known spa town has drawn visitors from far and wide to its therapeutic springs and baths. Industrial Revolution. From technological to sociological changes, the Industrial Revolution ushered in tremendous advances in tourism growth. Increased productivity, employment regularization, and expanding urbanization allowed workers greater time and inclination to take vacations during this period. Furthermore, people at this time often came to the seashore of countryside since there was a rise in the working class near large industrial centers. 19th century. Advances in technology such as the railway system and steam power made travel more convenient in the early 19th century. Initially, the railway was not designed for travel or tourism, but rather as a convenient mode of transportation for pleasure in the mid-19th century. Cooks and Kings was the first known travel agency, but they only catered to the travel needs of the British Royal Armed Forces. And in 1841, Thomas Cook opened the leisure travel agency, the Thomas Cook and Sons. In 1866, the first travel check was introduced by Thomas Cook. It was called circular notes. which were accepted from banks, hotels, restaurants, and shops. 20th century. During World War I, tourism became stagnant, but after the war, the demand to international travel increased and a large-scale migration occurred because of mass communication such as the cinema, radio, and television. In addition, people's interest in travel decreased because of automobile, and seaside tours became famous, led by improved public transportation. In World War II, air travel became more comfortable and faster compared to other forms of transportation. In fact, in 1958, Boeing 707 jet was introduced, and air travel for masses began, which brought the decline of sea travel. After World War II, there was an increase in travel interest and an increase in private car ownership, which affected the coach and rail services. The privatization of cars freed people from scheduled and fixed routes of public transportation. There was also an increase in the demand of hire cars during holiday. After the war, labor negotiations and travel legislation increased the length of official and paid holiday. The government devised more holiday by consolidating public holidays into familiar long weekends. 2 vacations a year were common occurrences dating the 1970s. In addition, there were a demand for a conference and incentive travel on a global scale because of business and trade that flourished in developing countries, such as Europe and the developed tourist-based economies of Asia like Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. 21st century. In this century, global events or problems hits decline international travel and international tourist arrivals in the 2010, brought by the global economic crisis that starts in 2008. 21st century also brought massive technological changes as the increase in internet usage revolutionized travel services. In the 2000s, online travel bookings multiplied exponentially, and in 2014, global leader Expedia expanded to include brands such as Hotels.com, Trivago, and many more. And now, let's jump off to the history of travel and tourism in the Philippines. Spanish occupation. During the Spanish occupation, travels were limited only for education, employment, and religious pilgrimage. Only few people can travel to the foreign country because it was expensive and time-consuming. In 1889, Hotel de Oriente, the city's first deluxe hotel, was opened, but it was replaced with a more modern hotel during the American occupation. American occupation. During the celebration of Americans' independence on July 4, 1912, the American opened the Manila Hotel. It was the replacement of Hotel de Oriente. On the other hand, Americans did mineral exploitation in the country's mountainous regions. They transformed the remote area of Baguio into a city. In the half of 20th century, there were still few foreign visitors, but their travel was confined in the country's capital city and the main point of entry, the Manila City. In 1935, the first trans-Pacific flight was inaugurated. Americans reached Manila Harbor in just 59 hours aboard the China Clippers. And in 1937, the country's first private airport was established. It is where Philippine Airlines took its flight in 1941. To sum up, in 1952, the country's first tourism association was organized. It was the Philippine Tourist and Travel Association, or PTTA. It was an association of all existing travel establishments that serves domestic and international travel. PTTA also worked for promoting the country's tourist industry. And in 1956, the Republic Act 1478 was created by Board of Travel and Tourist Industry. This serves as a policy-making body that regulates, supervises, and controls the tourist industry. In 1974, THty hosted international events and conferences like Miss Universe Beauty Pageant, the World Bank International Monetary Fund meeting, and the Ali Fraser Trillia in Manila. And in the year 1989, the first promotional campaign was launched by the THty with the slogan, Fiesta Island Philippines. 1990s. Budget airlines entered the business and more provincial airports were opened to international flights. This helps for civil aviation in order to boost the tourist industry in the country. In the year 2000, the celebration of public holiday was moved to the nearest weekend, creating a 3-day holiday or long weekends that gave Filipinos more time to travel around the Philippines. And in the year 2003 to 2010, Wow Philippines was launched to compete with Amazing Thailand and Malaysia Truly Asia. Wow had three meanings. First was Wealth of Wonders for tourist attractions. Second was Wild Over Waters for water-based experiences. And third was Wolf or Wolves for the promotion of Intramuros and other historical places like vegan. And at the same year 2003, a worldwide campaign Visit Philippines 2003 was endorsed by the WTO as a 24-month promotion in 2002. It was again used in 2015, which named as Visit the Philippines Year, and in 2016 it was named as Visit the Philippines Again Year. Year 2010. In this year, three major crises happened that extremely affected the tourism in the country. First was the criticism of marketing campaign Pilipinas Kay Ganda, and because of this, it was rejected less than a month after it released. Second were the banning of the Philippine carriers from flying over European airspace. The Dutch KLM carrier was the only airline operated between Philippines and Europe. And lastly, the hostage-taking event happened in Quirino Grandstand. Year 2011. According to the DOT 2011 year-end report, 2011 was a momentous year filled with new hope, enthusiasm, and optimism for the industry. Visitors volume posted two-digit growth at 11.2%. Year 2012. The first launch of It's More Fun in the Philippines was happened in this year. It went viral 2 hours after it was launched, and within weeks it launched, the campaign was judged as one of the top 3 smartest campaign by the Global Marketing Campaign Ranker. 2017 was the year of a new slogan Experience the Philippines that was launched by former Secretary Wanda Teo. In the year 2019, DOT relaunched the It's More Fun in the Philippines with a few tweaks on the logo, and it focused more on promoting the country as a sustainable tourism destination. Year 2020. Many crises has arose during this year, and the two major crises that so much affected the travel and tourism industry were the Taal volcano eruption in January and the COVID-19 pandemic. It really challenged the industry as it affected hundreds of flights that compelled numerous tourism establishments to suspend operations. 2021. Now, some airlines, hotels, and other businesses is gradually gets up from the ashes. With the vaccination and proper hygiene, we can already travel within the Philippines. Meanwhile, the international travel are only limited for those people who works abroad. Therefore, the travel and tourist business is intertwined with the current tourism industry. People traveling for work and pleasure have long been at the forefront of the travel and tourism. Despite the numerous issues, the travel and tourism business continues to grow and generate cash for the economy, as well as thousands of employment and a sense of cultural interaction between visitors and locals. In different commodities around the world, it brings peace, security, and education.